Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Gonna wrap up my recent series on this Beverly Hills audiophile, the Avantgarde Trios. Many of you have watched that and enjoyed that. The gear walkthrough was in part 1, music clips in part 2. In part 3, I wanted to cover something that might have got lost in the shuffle of part 1 and 2. Obviously, it's great gear, state-of-the-art gear, great music, and the music clips can actually reflect a lot of the things that I heard live. Nothing is a substitute for hearing it live, but I think people got to enjoy that. But also in those sidebar conversations that I put in the raw footage in between the songs, you may have heard some things. Number one, you got a taste for the acumen of the audiophile, and it's not just a bragging rights audiophile. But another thing that you may have missed in that sidebar conversation we were having is that he put a lot of credit for the system sounding the way it did on the David Berning SET amp, and how the horns have been harsh before and never got him exactly where he wanted to be until he got that amp. And so it brings up a macro point I wanted to cover in this final video, that you can have great gear, you can have great music taste and goals, and even a room that's conducive, but still the synergy of the gear means so much. And so many times I've heard Avantgardes not sound that great, but I never really blamed it on the gear. I knew it was a setup issue, but it takes a village. It takes everything to make things work to this level of performance. And there's also different levels to the level of consulting you get. There's people that have a little experience, moderate experience, and I kind of chuckle when sometimes people want to recommend people to give advice. And that's why I'm not going to tell you. I'm actually going to bring in this video a Zoom with Rick Brown of HiFi One. You've seen him on my channel. You've probably already been impressed if you've already seen him before. But this will show you there are different levels to this game and different levels to experience and expertise that just can't be done otherwise, or with people with less experience. And so I wanted to showcase why that SET amp from David Berning works so well with Avantgarde, why Rick was brought in to kind of put the finishing touches on this system, and also JR. We're going to touch on a lot of those topics today, so I don't want to spoil it for you, but that's the preview for what we're covering in this Zoom. So I hope you enjoy. If you want to reach out and meet Rick, feel free to contact me or his website, HiFi One. He's a distributor, works in California, Southern Cal, but I can put you in touch with him if you want. So I hope you enjoy this Zoom and leave any questions. He's also in my membership group. If you want to join, you can reach him there, or he'll be watching the comments as well. All right, enjoy, guys. All right, yeah, so just to get started, I mean, I wanted to just get it with you based on the prior 2 videos that we had at the gentleman's house in Beverly Hills at your client.
Yes.
And they both, the videos so far have resonated really well. I know I was super impressed. Others, even before I went out there, were super impressed, which intrigued me, and I wasn't disappointed. But I think one of the takeaways that wasn't totally apparent in the prior 2 videos, we talked about the gear, which was state-of-the-art gear, great gear. We talked about the music clips and the owner's goals that were, pushed them to those type of equipment and gear. But I think a lot of people forget about the other part of the equation, the room and the synergy of the gear making such a big difference. And so many times I have heard over the years, horn speakers, and particularly the Avantgardes and Expona a few years ago, which I think you heard as well, not
Yes.
live up to the pedigree of the gear. And it's not because anything wrong with the gear, but the limitations of the room setup and whatever synergy of the gear. And one of the takeaways in those sidebar conversations I was having with the owner in the last video, he made a particular point to say that things definitely changed for him with regard to the Avantgarde once he got the David Berning amp. And now I've heard it now in the gym system with the acapella spherons. That's a cost no object system easily. And it drove the entire system, including the bass modules at only like 20 watts per channel. Super impressive. But in some respects, this was just as impressive, if not more, in what the synergy did for those Avantgardes that I had never heard them at this level before. and to have the owner kind of reiterate as well that that was part of the equation. I thought it would be good to have you because, a lot of people may have watched the video I did with you where we had Steve McCormick, you, and also the people at Ypsilon and David Berning. You kind of put all these people together with their various strengths to come up with this Berning SET amp. And for those that haven't seen it, or even those that have, maybe worthwhile refreshing people's memory about this amp and why it was such a good match for this purpose here.
Well, Jason, I was very fortunate in getting together with the client after he had done really all the heavy lifting was already done. He had done a great job with the room. He had done a great job with electrical and mechanical isolation. And the other thing that he did, which thoroughly prepared me to enter the scene and be collaborative with him, is that he hired JR of Wham Engineering. And JR went in and he was really focused on the measured in-room electroacoustic response of the G3 Trios, along with the 2 space horns and the 2 REL 25 subwoofers. And then he did something that's really kind of counterintuitive in terms of the outcome, because he tailored each one of the woofers to the room, and each one ended up with a different gain and phase setting in that final application, which is just completely what you would not expect. But that's exactly what happened. So with him having done that part with the room and the speaker linearized, then the opportunity for me to come in was to find the amplifier that would really pair with that load. And just because it's 109 decibels efficient doesn't really tell the story of whether it was easy to drive or not. Obviously, you have a crossover to drive. But the other thing that you have in this instance is a loudspeaker that is 27 ohms in the mid-range and 19 ohms nominally overall. So at that rising impedance in the mid-range, it's not the easiest load for an amplifier to drive, and particularly to do so with real instantaneous current delivery. And that's one of the things that people have noted, yourself and others that have been in that room, that there's a relative lack of dynamic compression. And that one of the things that people walk away from that is with this incredible feeling of real dynamic control from top to bottom. And part of that is that you have an amplifier that doesn't have an output transformer to begin with, but it benefits from having a switch mode power supply. And that feeding directly to the amplifier allows it to have that instantaneous current delivery, which allows even a 20-watt amplifier with that kind of power to really track the signal. And that's where you don't hear that compression. That's where it sounds like it has that freedom from dynamic compression and just really does play full range, which is another point that probably is very easily missed, that the Avantgarde Trios, the amplifier has to drive them full range. And one of the reasons it has to drive it full range is that when you get right down to it, the crossover precedes the amps. So that what you end up with is the flavor of the amplifier, in this case, the Berning output transformerless tube amp. It's got to literally drive that entire loudspeaker from top to bottom. Now, it does have a crossover point at 100 hertz. But at that point, it goes over to the 2 space horns, which were in the middle. The 2 space horns are really 100 hertz and down. And then I'm not exactly sure where the REL 25s come in, but obviously below that. But it's that alignment of those that I talked about earlier that JR did, which really gave me the real canvas to come in and really paint this picture, because that's what it came down to, is that amp speaker interface seems on the surface to be something that you could drive with any single-ended triode amplifier with just a few watts because of that 109 overall efficiency. It is simply not the case. Whether you have a tube amp or you have a solid state amp, whether you have a muscle amp with high current or you have a tube amp that has a lot of less current but a lot of voltage, they all struggle with 29 ohms in the main. And this case, 27, I keep saying 29, it's actually 27 in the mid-range. That's the answer. And when you put all that together, the sound that he gets in that room delivers a combination of things that has beautiful tone, it's full range. It really does sound like something that when you've heard it with a low-level signal, then you really kind of appreciate the micro dynamics that that system is capable of. One of the beautiful things about that is that it's a horn system that you can play at very, very low levels and the sound stage stays together. that you don't have a collapsing of the sound stage. You don't have a truncating of the sound stage. Things stay in their relative position. They just get real loud, real fast when it's called on, but they can do it from a whisper. And I think that's one of the things about the Avantgarde G3 Trios in his house, that it's unexpected that they could play that way and have so few of the horn artifacts. I mean, as you mentioned in your earlier comments in the very first video, there are things that dynamic speakers do exceptionally well. There are things that horn speakers do exceptionally well. In this case, it's really kind of a decathlete kind of thing, because it does all of them very well. There's not one area that that loudspeaker in that room really has a weakness. It's different than other kinds of loudspeakers in some ways, but no weaknesses that I can hear. And I think that's what you've done a good job of really illuminating for your audience, is that this is not your daddy's horns. This is not your typical horn system. This is not a system that was put together by somebody who's impressed by pedigree or price. What this client was impressed with was putting all the pieces together. And by the time I got there, that final piece was this SET amplifier that is also output transformerless and that benefits from what I think are the finest chokes that are extant made by Demetrius with Ypsilon in Greece, silver wired, along with Steve McCormick. So it's really one of these situations where it really did take a lot of real highly talented people to pull this together. And I'm counting in that case, David Berning for his Zodal circuit. I'm counting Steve McCormick for all the chassis work, all of the analog work that he did. I'm counting, obviously, the work that was done by the people at Ypsilon for sure, definitely with their art. I think they really are into an artistic place with their chokes. I had a lot of other chokes that we tried. They all had the same impedance, but none of them sounded the same, which is quite interesting when you have the electrical impedance be identical. And when we made them with copper, I knew that their copper chokes were the very best, but when we went to silver, it was just an entirely another matter. And so that's really the story, I think, for this system, is that the gentleman that put this together, he did all the right things to begin with. He had dealt with the room, he had dealt with isolation mechanically and electrically, and he had done a fabulous job of having everything ready for me to come in. And that included something else that you talked about. He had to do some recabling. He had some relatively high capacitance cables in there. And one of the things that's easily missed is that he's using an autoformer, which is a passive line stage per se. So that passive line stage is being driven by his VAC phonal stage, which is a vacuum tube phonal stage. Now, that vacuum tube phonal stage, being a voltage device, trying to drive through that autoformer, and with 40 feet of high capacitance cable into a 50K ohm that he had before on the previous amplifier, just did not work well at all.
Yeah, but then, that's a perfect example of what I've talked about when cables can make a difference. You've got a passive preamp, right. You've got to drive it with the tube output stage, right. A long length. Here's right. A perfect example where the guy had mega-dollar cables. The pedigree, right. If you put that on AudioGone, people would drool over those cables. Did not work at all for that application. And it's kind of synonymous with the macro takeaway of what I'm talking about here. You can just churn gear. You can put gear that has pedigree on its own in a silo together. It still doesn't guarantee it's going to work good. And that's what I think was the key here, is that every piece was refined to be synergistic with each other. And that's why it was able to achieve the results that maybe in other venues, people have heard those same speakers or whatever piece and not had that same result. And I guess that Berning amp, I know you had said it's been reviewed twice by Robert Harley, right?
Well, the earlier iteration of it has been reviewed twice by Robert Harley. And matter of fact, in the Absolute Sound, I don't think he's ever reviewed the exact same product twice in a 12-month period of time. He didn't equivocate about how he felt about it the first time, but the second time when he came back a year later was to say after running it with a variety of different loudspeakers, he'd come to be even more impressed by the product. I am going to be working with the Absolute Sound and Robert Hurley for this new single-ended amp. So the amp that he talked about was launched in 2016. And maybe interestingly enough, it was launched in 2016 in Munich on Avantgarde Trios with their bass horns. And the system was set up with the people from Avantgarde, Matthias Ruff, And there was a lot of people in the industry that were in the room that day. Unfortunately for me, one of them happened to be Demetrius from Ypsilon, because that helped me to close the deal with him to do this collaboration for his silver wound chokes, which is unprecedented. He's never done that before. But when he was in the room and he heard that combination, what Matthias said to all the reviewers that happened to be there, was kind of an evening session where the audiophiles get together with the manufacturers, and we have that little evening session in Munich. He simply said that it was the best he had ever heard his speakers sound. And then later he said it was the best amp he had ever heard. Those are his words, not mine. And there were plenty of people in the room to hear that are reviewers. So that's what launched the original 60 watt per channel push-pull amp, which is still in production. But this is my magnum opus, if you will. This is the last of the amplifier that we'll be making with David Berning, because we simply don't know how to make it better. It is a very inefficient amp, being single-ended, but at the same time, being single-ended and using a very linear tube like a 211 or an 845, which it uses interchangeably without any adjustment, and being output transformerless and single-ended, this is the only amp we know of that combines those attributes. And what it really does for us is allows this amp to behave like a solid-state amp in the context of its ability to deliver instantaneous current and be able to drive that speaker full range, the same way you heard it driving those other speakers at the other client's house, where he had these huge woofer arrays that have to be driven entirely by it. There are no separate amplifiers for the bass there. That speaks volumes to this not being a conventional solid state, pardon me, being a conventional SET amplifier. It's very unconventional because we've solved the dilemma of being able to give that instantaneous current delivery and be able to drive a speaker full range. Any good SET has a tremendously linear mid-range, and that's the reason people take the trip. And that's also the reason, Jason, where you may have seen in the past, and your readers have probably seen in the past, that if you really wanted to use an SET properly, you'd have to use it just on the mid-range, and then you would tri-amp. Right? You put something like a tetrode amp on the bottom, a triode amp on the top. And the reason for that is obvious. They really don't have good frequency extension. That's the uniqueness of this product. Its switch mode power supply allows us to draw from the wall in a way that gives us that kind of current delivery that most tube amps simply don't have. They have voltage, not current. We have both. So I hope that kind of clears things up a little bit for you.
Yeah, and if people didn't watch the video, I'll probably link it where we broke down even the parts and the collaboration in even more detail, because Steve McCormick was in that video as well.
Yes.
He played a role in this. And when you combine those three talents that have never really collaborated with anybody else before, pretty impressive. But David Berning on his own, a lot of people may poo-poo just off the cuff when they hear SPS, or, you know, it feels light, or they feel like he licensed that technology, could get it cheaper somewhere else. It's not
Right.
really the same. And really, one thing that people don't realize is that almost nobody copies. In fact, the only other copies they have of David Berning's amps are ones that he's had to license and tell
That's
them
right.
how to do
That's
it. Because you could copy most tube amps, you could copy most solid state, you can copy a direct coupled amp. Almost any of these mega dollar amps can be copied in some form easy. Nobody even attempts to copy the David Berning amp, the ZOTL, and the only people have to pay them basically to use that. So it's something that on its core and with your push pull got rave reviews. I think Robert Harley thought it was the best amp in the world. This single ended one, I think, is even better.
It is. It is.
And I think the collaboration with Ypsilon and Steve McCormick was just perfect. And in this application, I know the owner attributed to it, and he'll know better than me, but it definitely stood out to me as being that combination, the best I've heard those speakers sound. And obviously the cabling, JR's work in the bass was meticulous. And that's another point to bring out, because we've talked about subwoofers in my recent videos about swarm. Sometimes people think that that means it has to be all around you. And ideally, that's what a swarm means. But as JR was able to execute here, as long as you get some asymmetry from those front loading woofers and what he did with phase and crossover points, it can result in some of the same things. You just have to have quite a few right in front of you, and he has quite a few bass modules in front of him. But it's not about the amplitude of the bass. It's about the quality of the bass.
That's right.
And
That's
you can even run those, Avantgarde's full range without the bass horns. Many people do, and get satisfactory performance. But this is a whole nother level of dynamics and full range and even linear bass that you rarely hear in most rooms. And again, credit to the owner, like you said, giving you everything, doing all the hard work ahead of time of giving you a great room to put this gear. So yeah, I think it's a great little part I wanted to wrap up and macro point, wanted to make sure people got, because there's
right.
levels to this game. Anybody
Yes,
could just buy fancy gear,
that's right.
throw it in a rig, and think they know something. There's just a whole nother things, from the cabling issue we talked about to the interface with the Berning amp, with the Avantgardes and JR's bass. There's just totally different levels to this. And that's what I like to promote in this hobby, is taking people on that ride for the highest level and bringing people like yourself, not just hearing me talk, people like yourself that have that pedigree and experience and expertise to deliver that, because there's so few that I've encountered like yourself to be able to do that. So, I love to feature you when I can. Glad you could do this Zoom. And, if anybody wants to work with Rick, your HiFi One is the name of your company, right?
Right, HiFi One, yes.
Yeah, or you can contact me. I'll make an introduction for you guys. And he's also in my membership group on the
Right.
YouTube channel. So him and Steve McCormick as well. So you want to have access to him and me, feel free to become a member. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. Is there anything else you wanted to share, Rick?
Yeah, I did. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy at all. This was not easy. And the client was very patient because this was an iterative process. We didn't just go north every time we made a move. I mean, we did a lot of things that we thought were going to work and they didn't work. And I had to bring Steve McCormick in. We had some issues with noise that we had to get it down. That's one of the things that when you have 109 decibels, 1 watt, 1 meter, let me tell you, if you don't have a super low noise floor, you got a big problem. Most solid state amplifiers would make enough noise on 109 decibels. It would be more noise than this amp makes. As a matter of fact, it is lower in noise floor than some of the solid state amps that he had even tried, or at least one of them. But the owner was willing to work with us. And I remember when I first put the amp in, and I'll leave this your readers with this thought. When we put that in, one of the things the owner said to me, I'm going to buy this amplifier because of the things that it does, but you're going to have to take it back if you can't get all of the noise floor down. And I remember saying, I will take it back. But even as I was saying that, I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it. And that's where you bring in people that have real expertise, like Steve McCormick was there not once, but twice. David Berning, we had him on the phone. He collaborated with us multiple times. It was anything but easy. But it's fortunate that we had the right client to work with that was willing to work with us, fund this, and you know the results. So thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to the readers out there. And I want to also give you credit. You've done a magnificent job of really navigating all of the issues. By the time I got to this video, you had done everything that was really necessary. You just gave me a chance to illuminate one aspect, which is obviously a critical one. Thank you.
Yeah, and I again want to thank the client, because he's kind of the same vein of me. We have a little bit different music taste, of course, but yeah, he's big on noise floor. I'm big on that. He's big on the bass being perfect.
Yeah, right.
He's got a
Yeah.
level of perfection. He's got a wisdom audio home
I
theater.
know.
I'm a fan of, so I felt like I was meeting a fellow brother. I was very much enjoying his taste in music as well, and learning some stuff from him. And I think the sidebars that we had in the last video were very illuminating to a lot of people. I like to give
Sure.
that kind of raw feedback, and I think he enjoyed it as well. So yeah, look forward to visiting him again. I know there's not much left to do, but there's always something potentially he could do.
Well, but
So
Jason, this was a first with you actually being videoed, you being
yes,
videoed. You know,
yes,
this, I think this was a first, if I'm not, I think it was, wasn't it?
yes. First time I used the lapel mics, which it did.
Yeah.
The audio didn't impress me that much. I think I might need to be a little further down. I'm a little loud, but yeah, overall, everybody did great camera work, and yeah, so maybe I'll do it again. I know that part of it was because you were absent. You unfortunately had COVID. Glad to see
Yeah.
you're feeling better. But that was the original plan for you to be on camera showcasing it. But yeah, I stepped in and I think it worked out really good.
Well, you made it easy because I could promise the client that he was going to be working with a pro, and he agreed.
Well, great. Well, I thank you for setting that up and glad you're feeling better and look
Thank
forward
you,
to
Jason.
seeing you soon. I'm going to be back out there probably in June. So I hope to get together with you.
Oh, we've got some things up our sleeve for you, buddy. We're not
Okay.
done. You know, this is an aspirational kind of journey.
Of
You never
course.
really get there. You aspire to it.
Yes, of course. So yeah, looking forward to that. So thanks
Okay.
again, Rick, and we'll
All
talk to
right.
you soon.
Thank you, Jason. Bye-bye now.
Okay.